Okay, so numbers seem to have settled a little bit, so we'll make a start. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Jason Reeves. I'm CIEEM's Head of Policy. I'll be hosting today with this panel. Today's the 8th episode of our Sector Streams webinar series. Today's topic is the next generation, looking ahead. It's part of our 30th anniversary for CIEEM. So this month we're looking to the next 30 years and what that means. And today we're looking at the next generation and career-wise and what that means. Just as a reminder, in case you aren't aware, part of our 30th anniversary celebrations is also a president's panel discussion tomorrow evening. So if you're interested in that, you can hear from some of our past presidents and our current presidents on what they see for the next 30 years. And their vision. That's on the website to book. That's tomorrow evening. So today, Sector Streams is our monthly topical webinar series. Previous episodes are on the YouTube channel and on the CIEEM website in the Resource Hub. We will record or are recording today's episode, and that will be posted as well for others to see or for you to go back to if you wanted to. So today's episode, we've got 3 panelists. We're going to talk about the next generation. Careers, taking that forward. If you have any questions for the panel, we're going to have a discussion amongst ourselves first. But if you have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A function and we will come back to them at the end. So today's panel, we've got Hayley Smith, who's an MSc student in Ecology and Conservation at Aberdeen University, Joe D'Souza, who's an early career ecologist at Arcadis Consultancy, and Judith Giles, who's an Associate Director at BSG Ecology, another consultancy. So yeah, let's kick off some questions then. Judith, if we start with you, if we look ahead 30 years, what does a thriving ecology sector look like to you?
I think we have to look at where we're going with net gain at the moment and the current agricultural bill. And I think that probably gives us hopefully a little bit of a clue that maybe we're going to be in a situation where we're focusing much more on land management, on habitat creation, habitat enhancement, and delivering that as a whole in a holistic approach rather than a sort of more targeted species by species approach. I think that's probably going to be assisted greatly by the advances in technology that we've got, both from how we implement and undertake surveys. We're just starting to see the advantages and the new technologies in terms of unmanned aerial vehicles and use of DNA and thermal imaging and all the wonderful things that are coming forward. And if you just think how much that's changed in the last 10 years even, it's quite hard to consider what it might look like in 30 years.
Thanks very much. Joe, as someone who's just entered or more recently entered the profession, where do you see things in 30 years' time for a thriving ecology profession? What are the changes you're expecting?
Oh, yeah, hi there, everyone. Things I was thinking is a bit more, I guess, general kind of points about overall the sector might look. I'd hope the sector would continue, well, let's hope it's kind of fully funded and resourced by government still, with strong legislation and policy and law, of course, backing up the sector, as that's crucial to the success of it. I hope it's kind of spearheading the fight against the climate crisis and the work that we do as a sector. Often kind of, particularly in consultancy, can feel like an afterthought in development or in planning. And I hope that in 30 years' time, it really is in the forefront of everything we think about when we think about our societies and our lifestyles. I hope natural spaces and green spaces which are again encouraged by our sector, and of course crucial, the general understanding of green spaces and wildlife is crucial to what we do. I hope that is accessible to all and all societies. Everyone has access to green spaces, and that we play our role in supporting that for our communities. And then job-wise, if we're talking about obviously still to careers, job-wise, I hope that we have a sector that is truly representative of our population in this country, whether that be sexual orientation, gender identities, race and ethnicities, religions, etc. I hope that that's in 30 years' time that really truly represents our societies and our communities, and obviously will greatly benefit in the work that we do.
That's great, thanks. Hayley, someone who's about to enter the career, what's your aspirations for the sector in 30 years' time or so?
I mean, these guys have covered very much all the points that I had written down, but I think funding is definitely one of the big ones because of the projects I've worked on in the past. Continuous funding is definitely an issue, which meant jobs weren't as available, or a lot of it was voluntary positions because the funding's just not there to pay for full-time field assistants and things like that. So I think I would hope there's more funding in which people would value our time. I think, especially as an early career, we're expected to kind of put in the grunt work or put in our time, as to say, where we're supposed to, it's almost expected that we do a lot of free work. So I think if our time was more appreciated and valued and actually paid for, that would be leaps and bounds, because I think that is one of the big blocking and one of the big roadblocks in a lot of people getting into conservation and this kind of industry is there's just, they don't have the ability to do unpaid internships and things like that. So hopefully that attitude towards that changes. But yeah, I think people in the last year especially have gained a lot of respect for nature and the green spaces they have available to them. So I think people's, like the general public opinion has changed in the fact that they value their outdoor environment a lot more now than they previously might have. So I think that's maybe one thing. So if that can happen in a year, 18 months, what's to say they won't value it more in the next 30 years?
Yep. To put you on the spot slightly, Hayley, do you think there will be changes in Scotland different to the rest of the UK? That's a very open question, but do you have a view?
Potentially. So obviously now there's the discussion of whether we have a new national park put in and where it will go and kind of what are the parameters around a national park, because obviously there's some debate about what that actually means to a lot of people. I think Scotland is doing certain things, but it's not to say that other places aren't doing those too. I think a lot of people say that Scotland is kind of setting the bar, but we still have a long way to go in some works as well. I don't think we should be seen as the pinnacle of everything, because we've still got a long way to go in our own attitudes towards things. So.
Yeah, I think there's the potential for a lot more divergence across the UK nations, and then Scottish independence is another one up in the air. Potentially changes things a lot.
I'm not going to get political. We'll leave that one today.
I'm not going to ask you that. I'm just saying it's there. Let's move on then. Joe, could you talk a bit about your experience coming into the sector, whether there are any challenges or barriers? You mentioned inclusivity earlier, something we can come on to as well.
Sure. So was that barriers? Sorry.
Yeah, barriers or challenges or
barriers and challenges. Sure. Yeah, quick summary then for myself. So I'm graduated about 3 years ago with a biology bachelor's degree from Cardiff University. Since then, I've worked largely in consultancies. I first worked at a small consultancy in Cardiff with a team of only about 4 full-time staff, and then did a research assistant position back at Cardiff University on a research project. And then since then, the last 2.5 years or so, have been at Arcadis, which is a much larger consultancy, global consultancy with tens of thousands of employees. In terms of barriers or challenges, I must recognize that I personally have not feel like I've had any major barriers so far in my career. However, that obviously by no means doesn't mean they don't exist. Typical general ones that you do come across are typically things, for example, like one of the first things was driving license, around access to a car for certain companies as well. So not every company or kind of work you need, it may need you to travel, but it's quite common that you have to travel to lots of sites around the country. So having a driving license is pretty crucial to that. I do know colleagues that do manage without, but then they are typically doing a lot more desk-based work and not doing as much site work. And obviously, site work is one of the big pluses of the career, getting out and about and seeing some great stuff. Access to a car as well. So at my company, we typically use hire cars a lot of the time, but again, that was something that was only at larger companies. You can probably expect typically with smaller companies, you might be expected to use your own car. Other barriers would say the working hours as well. So it can be pretty strange in ecology. Sometimes the weather changes and you have to drop things because you realise you've got to do a bat survey that evening, for example, when really you're going to do it on 2 nights away, something like that. So in terms of the hours, you can work what we say unsociable hours, so evenings is pretty typical. Some companies also, or some projects you may work on, you may actually work away for Monday to Friday. That happens quite often if on such big projects, where the travel is just too far to do in a day. So having a lifestyle where you can kind of be flexible in terms of the hours you're working, and also not just your hours, but equally being away from home for a few days can be quite challenging on everyone. And I think that's why the sector relies on younger people, which typically don't have children or other dependents to look after. But it's still something that does unfortunately limit what you can do, because you've got to go to where the work is a lot of the time. The other major barrier is kind of short-term seasonal contracts. Again, not for everyone. Hayley mentioned that previously, just the nature of the positions of things. Typically in consultancy, there are positions which are only for, they call them seasonal ecologists. So that's, I'd say roughly, I don't know, maybe March to September-ish sort of time. When again, I get a lot of bat-focused work in that time, and again, it is those seasonal contracts as well, and it can be very difficult to kind of know how long you're going to be kept on for, because things, work might be busy, so you might be on a rolling monthly contract after that your kind of course season is over. But yeah, it's very difficult for people to kind of plan your life around it, really. Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry, I'm on mute. Thanks very much, Joe. Judith, from an employer's perspective, are there things that you've seen as challenges and barriers to people coming into the profession?
I think the comment Joe made regarding the need for an ability to be flexible in your personal life, I think that can be something people find challenging. From an employer's perspective, it's always something that that we try and accommodate, and I think that's where you've got a real variety across the industry at the moment. I think going back to some of Hayley's comments on the initial question, I think something I would hope we have as an industry in 30 years' time is a bit more self-respect and a bit more respect of other disciplines. And I think possibly because of the background that we've come out of as a people, a voluntary industry, and people who did it for the love of it, it almost has played into the hand of being an industry that undervalues itself slightly in its professionalism and its professionals. But in terms of barriers, I think there are many good employers out there who will help overcome those barriers. So be it the ability to look at hire cars or schedule work so that a driving license isn't essential. But having said that, there is an obvious advantage to individuals to having a driving license and to having transport, because it is a huge part of what we do, is being out in the field and being able to get to places. So I think whilst you can get around it, and we certainly for short periods or intermediate periods, you can do that. In the long term, or when you've got the time, if you're studying and you can put the effort into getting your driving license, I think it's time well spent in terms of opening up options. In terms of the flexibility, I'm part-time myself. I have small children. There are others who are part-time in our company, and there are others who have, and I have colleagues who have weekly commitments to, you know, things like bands and, you know, sports activities and things that which we work very hard, even in the summer, to try and say, okay, we know, you know, whoever it is we try not to schedule them on a Tuesday night because we know that that's really difficult for them and it interferes with their personal life. But that can be hard, and sometimes you have to go, you know, we're right in the thick of it. We've got a couple of weeks where things are going to have to just have a little bit more take than give, and then we give it back at the other end to get the balance right. Certain in terms of other inequalities, personally, I've never felt that it's been a problem being a woman in my sector. I started off in an engineering consultancy where there were very few women, but it never felt like an issue to me. And I'm not saying that it isn't for some people and in some places, but I'd certainly say that there are, in my experience, good companies out there where these things are not a problem.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think on the diversity and inclusion, gender is the one we're doing quite well as a sector, just in terms of total numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see more diversity in the sector. Yeah. I think one of the issues that we have, even in terms of use of our countryside, is that there are, you know, it's really quite horrible statistics in terms of minority groups not using our countryside and not feeling that it's accessible to them. And I think, well, if people aren't out in the countryside and aren't getting that love of the countryside as a child, how can we expect them to come into our industry? Absolutely.
Yeah. We'll come back to that point. Hayley, as someone who's about to go into the sector, what do you see as any opportunities, challenges, or barriers for looking for a job in the new year?
I think some of the biggest challenges for me is going to be, like I mentioned before, seasonal work. So as a graduate, a lot of jobs will kind of advertise themselves as all levels of ecologist welcome, and then you will apply and they'll say, oh no, we're not looking for graduates. You're like, but you said all levels, so technically graduate isn't all level, and that is a problem. And they say, oh, reapply in like March time when we're looking for seasonal ecologists, which we've mentioned before, like that's not a sustainable, stable income, which when you're moving to a different city for that kind of job, it does make it harder when you know that income's not going to be reliable for longer than maybe 5 months. So that definitely makes it hard. I know some of the other students in my class are kind of struggling with the fact that they get told that they're not experienced enough. So because of the pandemic, a lot of them didn't take years out like I did. They went and did their undergraduate and straight to their master's. So they keep getting turned down from jobs because they don't have the experience. But also part of that is all the experience is unpaid, and a lot of people can't afford to do that. I was in the fortunate position where the experiences I was doing was voluntary, that I could do while still having a job. So I could kind of do a different part-time job while funding doing that experience. But not everyone has a situation in which they can do that. So I think that's a big barrier for students, especially coming out now. And like we mentioned, driving licenses is a big one. A lot of the students in my course are actually very diverse from other countries, and they won't have a driving license that's potentially legal in the UK, or they've not got transferred across, or they have other barriers to getting their driver's license. Whereas I was fortunate enough to get mine, like basically as soon as I could, I had my driving license. Like that was one thing my parents were very kind of insistent upon. It's like, well, you're going to need it when you want to do your stuff, like your biology stuff. And I will say a lot of the positions I've had for getting that experience, I've gotten because I can drive. So I'm based in Aberdeen, but I've been able to drive up to the Highlands and stay there for 3 days out of a week for months to do a squirrel job up there. So having the ability to drive does make a huge difference. But obviously you can do desk-based stuff, but most people get into the sector because they want to go outside and experience with animals and do that kind of thing. So yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest barriers, I think.
Just you mentioned there about experience you have been able to get through a year out effectively before going back to the masters. What kind of skills have you been focusing on acquiring for then going into a career?
So out with university, because obviously we learned some in our courses, but out with that, I focused on, I already had some red squirrel conservation work, but I did some more of that. And there's local charities, if other students and things want to get involved in that, that are more than happy to have volunteers help out. Badger surveying is another one that I've been focusing on. So I go out a couple of times a month to work on badger surveys. And bats is the other one. So I identified all the kind of gaps in my CV, and bats was definitely one of them, because I thought, oh, there's more people experienced much more than I don't need to do that. And then think, actually, no, pretty much every company that's going to hire you wants you to have that. So doing summer surveys and field surveys and waterway surveys for Bat Conservation Trust is one that I've been doing quite a few of, just to kind of gain that experience. I've been going out with other people who have done hundreds of surveys before to kind of show me the ropes of getting used to how you conduct different types of surveys. So I think if you're getting into it and you're a student and you have the time, I really recommend you do get the time somewhere. I know we're busy, but somewhere in the time to kind of reach out to different charities and see kind of what volunteer roles they have. And sometimes it's an hour twice a month, sometimes it's a little more. And there's various things that people can do to kind of fit into that. So I've just kind of identified all the gaps in my CV and kind of filled them. So things like radio tracking red squirrels, one of the most random jobs. I didn't think I'd do that, but there you go. So different kinds of things like that, just to kind of bulk everything out that I was maybe missing over time that I didn't learn in education.
Okay, that's great, thank you. So I was going to ask a question now about advice for others entering the sector. We've had a question come in that's very related to that. It says, as a mid-qualification student, how would you recommend breaking into the sector? The general advice is to get work experience through volunteering, internships and apprenticeships. But as a 40-something looking for a career change and facing hurdles such as people looking at younger people that can be retrained easier, or that I don't have the experience, very frustrating time and disheartening, and working hard on my degree that I can't seem to get any further. So there's a career change in there is one element of it, but the other one is about getting into the sector. Joe, can we start with you?
That's a great question there. I'm just taking a moment there to have a think about what to say, really. I'm just rereading the question.
Judith, did you want to jump in maybe?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, in terms of the career change aspect of it, some of the best ecologists that I've worked with have been career change ecologists. We've had some fantastic people at BSG who've done other things before, you know, be it teaching or MOD, range of backgrounds. And actually, I think what those people have brought to us has well, firstly, they've obviously got a real genuine passion for what we do, because they've been brave enough to make that really bold leap from having a career already and going, actually, this isn't quite what I set out to do in life. You know, I want to be doing something else, and that's really brave, and it shows a great deal of commitment, which is something that we really look for in somebody. So I think in terms of how you then go about getting that experience, specifically as a more experienced person in other ways.
Well, so I mean, Hayley mentioned it with volunteering with NGOs, and this one also talks about volunteering. I mean, are there opportunities with consultancies? I mean, with your consultancy or with Joe's potentially, where you would let someone shadow, perhaps something like that? If someone got in touch with you on a personal level, sorry, at an individual level rather than a personal level, is that something you'd consider?
We take student placements, and we have done that. In terms of people shadowing, I prefer, well, it's something that I think can potentially put us on very shaky ground, and my preference would always be to offer to look whether we can offer that person a contract and pay them for their time to assist, because I think and we do have lots of people that have been through that route, gaining experience, and they, you know, maybe they do a couple of seasons of hours with us when they can and when we can use them, and doing that they get lots of shadowing experience. And sometimes, you know, if it's somebody particularly wants to do something, sometimes we can look at how we can branch that out into some more of the office side of things and the consultancy side of things, not just the field work. But I think I'm generally much more comfortable to pay people while they get that experience. I think it's an issue that we have in the industry, that we expect people to live on nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, did you want to come back then on advice for getting into the sector?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I'm glad Judith there as the employers made that point about not exploiting volunteering in our sector, because yeah, absolutely, that's something we try and avoid. I would say, leading on from that, there is obviously if the specialist is obviously still studying full time, but it maybe has the ability to volunteer. I think that's I'm reading the question. There's always potentially being a 0 hours ecologist, as they call them, or freelance or something like that. So basically, again, unfortunately, it largely is seasonally based, but I can say with some confidence at the moment, especially for our company, there's a lot of work going on, and we are reliant on a lot of 0 hours ecologists to pick up this work, and it doesn't necessarily need pre-experience. In some cases, it could just be a typical what you'd consider an entry-level kind of role as like a second for a survey. So our company, almost all the time, we're out with at least one other person when we're on site as a buddy system, mainly for a health and safety angle. But of course, it's a fantastic training opportunity when you go out with someone senior who kind of shows you around, points at every plant and every fecal sample on the ground and says what it belongs to. So I think basically you just need to contact, I think the way to do it is you contact companies and say, I live in this area, I can do this, I can do this, I've got a car, if I have a license, whatever that might be, if that's relevant. And then you say, and they'll come to you whenever they need an extra pair of hands, basically. And that may work in this instance as someone, if you're not relying on the income, but more just trying to get a foot in the door and get some experience, is a great way of doing that, because getting the experience, you're going to get paid for it. You're going to be doing the actual work what the sector does, as opposed to maybe just like a file sort and roll in an office, which work experience can be. It could just be like, oh, go make yourself busy in there or something. And obviously, of course, you're then meeting people in the sector, and that's just another fantastic way of getting to know people, getting some names, getting some contacts. So then when you finish the course, you've already got that experience. And if you are looking to go into, for example, consultancy, then you can say, I've already got consultancy experience, and that's a big tick against your name for someone just entering their new career.
That's great, thank you. Moving on slightly then, so Judith, from an employer's point of view, what are you looking for in new entrants to the sector?
We're not looking for someone who has loads of experience and who's done it all before, but we are looking for people who've got a real aptitude for problem solving, and that we think will develop quickly given that experience and training. A good relevant degree is really helpful. It's not essential if there's other experience there instead, that ticks those boxes in terms of the skills that you might have learnt. Baseline botanical survey is increasingly very important. It's particularly important now. You've obviously got JNCC's phase 1, or you've got UK habitat classification, which dovetails more easily with biodiversity net gain calculators, which are not going anywhere anytime soon, and we're all using. So one of the things I would definitely recommend anybody who's looking to start their career is spend some time botanizing. And it can be self-study time, it can be signing up to some courses, getting out with your local botanical society, because actually it's something that you can fit around the rest of your life. Plants don't go anywhere, they're not daytime dependent. It doesn't matter what time of day it is, but daylight helps. But if you can secure some of those basic botanical skills, that really helps set candidates apart, because initially the first one of the things that you need all your ecologists to be able to do is to go out and do phase one habitat surveys. And if you can't identify plants accurately, you're not going to be able to classify habitats accurately, and we can't give good advice independently. So that's a really critical skill to hit. Protected species experience. We've got a very relatively limited number of protected species that we deal with regularly in consultancy. So dormice, newts, otters, bats, watervole, any one of those, and badger, one or two of those, that if you can create, really do some, even if it's just reading up and understanding what the best practice and the industry guidance is on those species, and then getting the experience that you can, that will stand you in good stead. I mean, we occasionally get early career ecologists applying with licenses, which is obviously brilliant if you can do that, but it's not essential. There's, in terms of but a really good way of focusing down on those skills is thinking about dissertations and how you focus those elements of the degree that you have some element of choice in. So whilst the tropical field trips can be really fantastic, sort of when I'm looking through CVs, my heart sings when somebody says, I've done camera trapping of hazel dormouse, and you're like, brilliant, lots about hazel dormouse and camera trapping. That's fantastic. Or whatever it is, but something that's underpins or is of relevance to the nuts and bolts of what we do. Similarly, ornithological experience is great, but actually for an early career ecologist, it may not be that useful in terms of being one of those skills that you can knock on the head at that point, and that birds tend to be they tend to appear in their careers. it's less, it sets you apart less well at an early stage. Later on, I think there's real room for ornithological expertise. GIS, definitely. I think it's a fairly fundamental part of most degrees now, but certainly, when I started as an ecologist, I'm not even sure we were digitizing maps. I think we might still be drawing them out and scanning them in. Now everything we do is on GIS, preferably experience of handheld equipment and GPS and things that help us to map more accurately to inform those net gain calculations, and any other remote data capture, UAVs, camera trapping, that side of things is always going to be a good thing to be able to turn your hand to. But it's no good doing any of that if you can't communicate. And I think fundamentally, the most important thing in an early stage ecologist, or any stage in an ecologist, to be frank, is you have to be able to communicate in writing and verbally. We've got a lot of challenges in our sector and, well, on our planet in the next, in the distance of your career. And we need to be able to get people on side. We almost need to have a bit of a PR element to us, because we need to be telling people things they don't want to hear a lot of the time. And we need to be explaining to people what they need to do and why they need to do it and what the options are, and so that they can make the right choice for them while staying within the law. So communication, I think, is critical.
That's great, thanks. Hayley or Joe, did you want to add anything to that before we move on?
I was just going to say that, yeah, you're right, JS and things like that are covered in a lot of degrees now. So if you are doing a biology degree, then most of those things are covered, but the practical experience is harder. So like the protected species in the mammals, that is the thing that isn't really covered, because obviously they don't have time to do everything. So that is the kind of stuff you would do through voluntary work. Whereas most degrees cover kind of plant biology to some aspect. I think my biggest tip there would be, if there's an area of biology where you think, oh, I don't really need to focus on that, or I don't really like that, I don't want to do it, do it. Because I'm now at the point where I'm doing my master's and I'm in a plant biology class, and I think, yeah, this is what I get for avoiding plant biology in my undergraduate, is I now need to work a lot harder to kind of scrub up my baseline compared to what everybody else's might be. So there's a lot more hours spent looking at plants and dried samples and all sorts of stuff. So if there's an area where you think, I'm going to avoid that because I don't really like it, if it's one of those base skills, take it anyway. Even if you don't like it, you'll suffer maybe for a few weeks, but it'll be really worth it in the long run.
Thanks. Joe, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, great points there by Judith and Hayley there. Just to add, I guess, just a bit on the communication point. I think, speaking from experience, again, very fortunate in this, but having the opportunity to kind of approach lecturers when I was at university and other people I knew, and just kind of getting to know them on a more personal level, basically being a bit of a teacher's pet to some of them, kind of paid off a bit when a few weeks down the line they went, oh, you're interested in this thing, do you want to help me do work on this project, that kind of thing. So it is, it is a very key thing to show the keenness, I guess, is a really key point to everything, to show you that you're passionate and that you're going to do a good job, basically, even if they don't know what your skills are yet. The fact that you're there talking to them about something or hanging around at the end of lectures or something, that really just demonstrates that. And it can lead to things down the line. I think you talk to anyone who's been very successful, they often do say things which can be very frustrating. They say, oh, I bumped into so-and-so and that led to this thing, that led to this thing. And it's very, very hard to really make, I don't know, I'm kind of doing that now when I'm saying just talk to the right people. But it's true in some ways. If you just, it takes luck as well, but if you just talk to enough people and keep trying and get your name out there, it's a small sector what we're after. We're not all going to be the next David Attenborough, that's for sure, but getting to know the people that can link you up with other people is really key.
Those communication skills, as Judith mentioned, isn't it, really?
Yeah,
communications
absolutely.
And networking. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Moving on from that then, so coming back to the sort of theme of looking ahead for the next 30 years, Joe, can we start with you? Just in your time in the sector so far, have you seen things that are changing or things that you can see coming? And I'm thinking of some of the things that Judith mentioned, like drones and eDNA, and how those might change the sector, and then maybe some policy as well, potentially.
Sure. So change the next 30 years. Are
they going to change the skills we need as a sector?
Right, of course. Yeah, I think as Judith said, things like GIS has obviously come on leaps and bounds in the last few years. That really is a key skill now. A point of interest though is I actually in my current role don't do any GIS, which is glad, because I didn't do anything at university either, because that wasn't part of my university course. So interesting point there. Maybe that was just my course, but yeah, I didn't do any at university, and now we have basically, because of this company, I guess, size, they have a GIS team. Although I do wish I did do GIS, because it is a very useful skill, and I do try and dabble with it myself, but when I can, but we're not supposed to. So I think just that's a key point there of just keep ahead of what skills you need. Of course, we do use things like GIS, but we're out in the field using various programs to collect data and enter it into GIS-based programs. One's called Collector is one of them, or Survey 123. The other things I'd say, in terms of, I mean, again, as Judith said before about biodiversity net gain, and kind of net gain calculations, that's something I'm not too familiar with myself. I've only done a small amount of work on that so far, but it's evident that it's come on very quickly, and is quite an important role now in terms of the work that we do. All looking towards biodiversity net gain, we have to kind of work out calculations on even trying to work out how you even do net gain and things like that. And obviously it's still in its early stages, and there are questions around its effectiveness, but that is certainly something I can suspect we'll see more of in the future. But but yeah, I guess you said about DNA as well. So of interest, I think the Great Crested Newt guidelines that we all use don't even mention, I think, eDNA surveys. I think because they're from 2001 or around that era. I'm pretty sure they don't mention it. So and now it's a staple part of it's a key method for surveying for Great Crested Newts. So really, again, just demonstrating how quickly things can change. And I imagine we'll see DNA used for lots more things. They already use it for things like bats, I think, for analysing fecal samples of bats. So yeah, I think I can't remember other more modern uses I've heard of. The other thing is, another random point I've remembered is dogs. The use of sniffer dogs. This is something I've seen more and more of. A bit worried that my job might be replaced by a dog in the future, but hopefully
Dogs and robots. That's what you're worrying about.
Dogs and robots. Yeah. So dogs are now being trained to smell Japanese knotweed. Being trained to smell newts. They've been trained to smell bats. Finding bat carcasses on the wind farms. Really quite amazing stuff that there's now dogs are being used for. So yeah, an interesting new part. You know, we're all thinking about technology, but going back to a bit more primitive with the use of dogs to help us and our kind of hunter-gatherer era of life, but now applied to ecology. So that's all. Yeah, that's probably where I see a bit of. It's going to be an interesting mix of things, I think.
That's great, thanks. Judith, did you want to come in there on? I mean, you mentioned some of these things already, but other things that you're looking at, maybe from an organizational point of view, that trying to get ahead of the curve a little bit, at least to think about, if not change things now?
I think the biodiversity net gain side of things, or biodiversity gain as it is now, then certainly we've already talked about botanical survey. That's not going to become any less critical. It's definitely becoming more and more important in terms of being able to do habitat condition assessments and do that. But equally, sort of the next step on in that with biodiversity net gain is the experience and expertise in habitat management and creation, and saying, you know, do we have the confidence and skills that we are going to be able to reach these target conditions, and you know, and how do we advise clients to get there, and to work with specialist contractors, and to go back and monitor. So that's going to be increasingly important. Licenses, I think, will remain important in whatever form they take, be it district, low impact, personal. That's just going to need something that people are going to have to keep up to date with and keep those specialist skills. But I think that's probably, you've already mentioned the dogs. We've got dog in training in-house. And we've done some wonderful work with detection dogs in terms of monitoring wind farms and things. So yeah, I think there's definite scope to expand that side of the sector, which I also think would be really good for the staff welfare side of the sector. There's a lot to be said, for dogs. But yeah, I think it's going to be a bit of watch this space. But
yeah, that's great, thank you. Hayley, just coming to you then, from someone, perhaps as someone who's not working at the moment, looking from the outside, are there things you see changing, or things that perhaps lecturers or others have said to you that to look out for in the future?
Technology is obviously definitely one that we've covered quite a bit. Thermal imaging particularly is becoming more and more popular, which baffles me, because obviously we're still used to using the bat detectors. So when people are setting up all these big camera rigs, you think, all right, okay. But there's times where we'll be sitting and showing our lecturers like a new kind of tool or something that we found in JS, and they're like, oh, didn't even know it could do that. And you're like, oh, it's just like more of a recent one. So it's things like that they're forever developing new things. So I think sometimes we maybe have the advantage where we're kind of progressing and learning at the same time that these technologies are being developed. So it's not like we have to try and retrain ourselves to get used to these technologies. We're kind of coming up with them. Whereas a few of our lecturers kind of do look at us and think, how are you guys even doing some of these things? Like, what is this? This makes no sense. But then there's old school methods that maybe we wouldn't use anymore, that things like hand drawing maps, they have their time and place still, because GPSs can go wrong, things can be classified wrong, or that sort of thing. So I think kind of the old school methods do have their time and place, and maybe we're a bit more out of touch with those because we don't learn them. So I think paying attention to, as maybe as demeaning as this is going to sound to some people, pay attention to your elders. they learned from the grassroots, so they know what they're talking about. And we only have these technologies because they've found gaps that, you know, they've realized that they would like a tool to fill something that they need, and they've developed it for us to then use. So I do think technology is probably the biggest ones, but I think a change in kind of people's opinion on ecology, like there's quite often when I started kind of coming into this, that people were like, well, why is that even necessary? Well, what's the point in that sector? Why is there even a sector around that? And then kind of once you explain the whole point of the job, they're like, oh, I can see why that's important. But at the same time, there's some people who obviously still don't believe in global warming and climate change. So there's both sides. There's people who respect our industry a lot more, and there's people who disregard it entirely. So I think hopefully over the next 5, 10, 15 years, maybe that'll change. Maybe it'll be a case of kind of seeing the importance of the environment in general. They'll stop kind of dismissing it, maybe, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think I was going to come on to that. So just before I come on to that as our last question, just a reminder to everyone who's watching, if you want to put any questions in the Q&A function, please do put them there. We'll be wrapping up in sort of 10 minutes or so. So my last question then was around that, what Hayley just mentioned around perhaps making the sector more appealing and how we do that and how we help with the diversity and inclusion, but also that respect and how the sector is valued. How do we move through that in terms of the next 5, 10, 30 years? Does someone want to jump in on that first?
I guess from an industry perspective, I think us and many of the other more responsible consultancies are spending time talking to schools and interest groups and working with universities to increase awareness of ecology as a career path. It certainly wasn't a career path I was aware of when I was at school, barely at university. We can input to the focus and content of courses through liaison with lecturers and involvement in steering groups. We can attend and we can speak at careers events, and we can identify, help identifying and mentor students through projects. I think we've also got, as an industry, we're getting better at the PR side of things. You know, we have the CIEEM awards. There are other industry awards that really showcase the best of what we do, and we can use social media and showcase some of that work that we've done. We've been working for years on Walthamstow wetlands, where that's sort of Europe's largest new urban nature reserve, I think, and that's one, which I think that has far-reaching effects on the local economy, and also it's an educational hub in one of London's more deprived wards. So I would hope that people would understand and maybe that start to think, well, how did this get here? Where did that come from? And I think by getting our projects out there, hopefully it creates a bit more of a route of understanding as to what our industry is about, and that it is an option.
Just on a side note there, we as an institute, we're working more with STEM network again, to get more STEM ambassadors related to ecology. So at the moment, it appears there's hardly any. I mean, there's some people doing it, but not very many STEM ambassadors going into schools to talk about ecology as a career and the broad spectrum of things you can do with it. So yeah, trying to help there. Joe.
Yeah, I guess looking at more kind of, awareness of the industry aspect. I can't remember when I found about consultancy or just environmental based work as a whole. But I think it probably was sometime in university. I remember all the careers things were angled towards kind of pharmaceutical companies or biochemical companies or medicine. That was the overall biosciences kind of approach to careers, was that kind of angle of things. Not really interested in anything whole-bodied or green or natural. But that's just a taste for how, and that's university level, but it goes all the way down to primary or infant school. Really, it's just that engagement with nature and interest and access to these spaces as well. As Judith has mentioned, the access of communities to natural green spaces are stark, really, in terms of who really can access our countryside and these things. You know, if you haven't got a car, if you can't have the funds or even know where to go for these things, then it is really difficult to kind of get anyone interested and aware of nature in general, and to begin caring for it, and then to think, oh, maybe I can make a career out of this. So again, I think we're at Arcalis also looking at things like summer schools. I think we're talking to the British Ecological Society, who runs summer schools in the summer. I know we've helped with these previously. There are also scholarships. I think British Ecological Society, BES, are funding a few scholarships in partnership with other consultancies, which are, sorry, not scholarships, they're like internships or paid positions, basically.
I think they call them fellowships. Yeah. Right,
fellowships, that's the one. And that's again targeted towards those from low income backgrounds, and is an amazing opportunity for people to do. And that's only unfortunately a handful of people they can support, because it's only supported by small companies. But I'm really hoping that larger companies can get involved in that, and just it's the funding really that's what's needed to kind of boost these roles. And it's all cyclical. You know, once people see someone from their community, or it looks like them, or they know them, is shown that as a representative, this is what I can do with this degree, or this is what I can do, this is what I want to do. I want to go to university and study this, and this is the job I can do and the work I can do from that. You know, it all stems from there. I think that, you know, increasing that representation in terms of, you know, black and minority ethnic communities, or genders, or sexual orientation, or any of these marginalized groups of people within our sector. Just increasing that representation is key to kind of further making it more diverse and inclusive.
That's great, thanks. Hayley, you like the last word?
Yeah, so I think we've covered quite a lot of it, particularly starting education young, or getting the interest young. So for me, my interest in biology started when my granddad used to take me on walks with the dogs and say, oh, this is what this tree is, this is this plant, why do you think this does this? And that got me really interested in it. And I wouldn't, I think, have gone into biology if he hadn't taught me about those things when I was younger. And I have a niece now, and anytime I'm off doing something with squirrels or badgers, she's always really interested, and she always says like, oh, what were you doing today? So I always take pictures to show her the kind of things that I'm doing. And she's only 5, and she already is really interested in things like this. And every so often she'll say to my sister like, oh, Mum, let's go to this place because I want to go on a walk that Auntie Hayley told me about. So even being so young, and she's kind of doing these things and then showing her little brother as well, it kind of just shows you how quickly they can be interested in something. And as a kid, their brains soak up everything. So I think if you were to show them kind of the different ways you can go with our industry at such a young age, it's quite cool. But I have personally known that a couple of the rangers, at least from Aberdeen and some other places in Scotland, do go into schools and have like education days where they take them into their national parks or their countryside and show them different things that's in their local area. So I think starting younger and just showing them all the different ways you can go, like consultancies and rangers, and even working for Aberdeen City Council or your local city council, that kind of thing, and just showing all the different ways they can be involved is great, because they might not think any of that's accessible to them when really it can be. And there's different ways to do it as well, because I think a lot of kind of, at least in my experience going through, a lot of it was, yeah, university is a great idea. You should all go to university. You should all do that. And sometimes a lot of students or other people don't think that university is really for them. So I think showing them that there are ways to do apprenticeships, and I think like the Kickstarter programs that are happening now and kind of coming out of the pandemic are really useful, because I've seen so many that have hundreds of applicants because they just want to get involved in something new. So I think having programs like that is also great because it makes it more accessible.
That's brilliant. That's great. So we're nearly out of time. So thank you very much for all of your views on that. So as I said, we've recorded this episode. It will go onto the YouTube channel and onto the Resource Hub on the CIEEM website. The next episode will be the end of next month. We're still working on the just tweaking the date and the speakers for that one. So yeah, just a last thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much to the participants, and have a nice day. Thank you very much.